And so thanks everybody for having me back. I greatly appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk about this topic tonight. I know we have with us the most dedicated group of folks out there, because after a long week and a long day, you've joined us in the evening to talk about contracts. So if you're doing that, then I know I've got the best of the best that are joining us here tonight. So I hope this meets your expectations, and we'll all learn a little bit from a review of this topic, because it is pretty important. All right, so with the smaller group, I've got the chat window open. So what I would say is, it might be, normally if it's a large group, I'm not the best at being able to manage the flow of the presentation and also monitor a chat window, but I think if they're not flying in fast and furious from a very large number of attendees, I might actually be able to manage that tonight. So I'll look over here as we go through the information.
I'm here to support also.
Yes, and Mark is also going to be supporting that as well. So we'll try to make this a little more conversational. And if you've got a question, just pop it in chat so we know there's a question out there, and we'll go ahead and address it as we go along. And that will make this maybe a little less formal, a little more interactive, and hopefully a more enjoyable experience for everybody as well. All right, so hopefully we got thumbs up on that, and we can just dive right on into what we've got to talk about tonight. All right, so why do we need to chat about this idea of contracts? So I am trying, actually before the talk tonight, I sat and spent a minute thinking, going back through all of the various companies I've worked for, programs I've been a part of, customers that I've consulted with, and I've tried to think of any SAFe transformation or SAFe company that I've worked with that had an art that was building a solution that did not have any contracting concerns. And I racked my brains, and I couldn't think of a single one. It is almost inevitable that in order to build complex technological solutions, it's almost always going to involve some type of internal staff that are going to be working on that, and the support of one or more external suppliers. So if we're going to work with an external company, we know that we have to have a contractual arrangement between companies to manage that engagement, that relationship. Well, because it's so prevalent, we also have to recognize that in any contract, there are two sides, two parties involved in that contracting arrangement. There's a buyer and a supplier. And what I have seen across the many years doing this is that some of our traditional ways of doing contracts cause real headaches for both parties, for both buyers and suppliers, especially when we move into the way of working represented in SAFe. That's going to be a lean, agile way of thinking and working. What kinds of problems do we run into? All right. So we all know that following an agile process, you're not going to have big design up front, lots of specifications up front. Now, if the supplier is coming to the buyer and recommending that way of working, the buyer may be the one having a shock reaction, saying, what do you mean there's not going to be a big design up front? But it could also go the other way. The buyer could go out to the market and find suppliers and say, you know, we're working in an agile way of working, so we want you, supplier, to not expect us to give you, you know, a big giant specifications list that you're going to bid with. The supplier could also have that same reaction. Well, how are we going to do our bid? If we don't have specifications, how are we going to price this thing? So as you look at all the different stickies on the right-hand side of the screen, these are the kinds of things that I have seen over and over, and it could be on both sides, right? When you get to the terms and conditions and get the lawyers involved, and in Agile we talk about Agile being, you know, being grounded in an environment based on trust. Well, lawyers don't have trust anywhere in their vocabulary, right? That's just not something they normally are comfortable working with. I would say the same is probably true with procurement officers. So there are some real challenges around this idea of building a contractual relationship between two parties when the way of working is built around lean agile mindset and around a SAFe paradigm. So let's just take a step back here and ask ourselves, what is the purpose of the contract in the first place? Any contract. So first of all, a contract helps us create alignment and a common understanding as to context, vision, and objectives of this relationship. Well, already that sounds so far so good, because alignment is one of the 4 core values of SAFe. So of course we want alignment between buyers and suppliers. So far so good. Contracts also set the basic rules for how the organizations are going to work together for the duration of the engagement. That also sounds great, right? So the more we have transparency and clear expectations between the two parties, the more likely it is that this working relationship is going to be a positive one. So that looks good. Now this is where we start getting into a little bit of contention, because it doesn't always work out this way in contract negotiations. A good contract will apportion the risk and set expectations for how both pain and gain will be shared between the organizations as challenges, barriers, opportunities emerge. Now, many of you may know that for about 15 years prior to coming to Scaled Agile, I worked in the US federal government market. So I worked in federal IT. And I was involved in many proposal response efforts, contract negotiation efforts. And my experience in that market, and a little bit even before going into the government market when I was working in the commercial space, it's rare that you find two organizations, two sets of lawyers, and two sets of procurement officials come together with the goal and the intent of creating win-wins and finding shared pain and gain. Typically, they're finding, how can we put our organization in the best position of leverage and get the most out of the other party in this arrangement? So they almost have a win-lose mindset going in. And that's where, while that may have worked okay, I still don't know that that's even in a traditional environment the best way to go, but certainly in an agile environment, if we're going in from that perspective, already we have a warning light on the dashboard, because that's starting to set some working environment and some cultural aspects that we know from the values and principles of Lean and Agile are not necessarily going to be productive. So then it really goes downhill when each party is trying to squeeze the most out of the other entity that they possibly can. What we end up is, frankly, just bad contracts, unrealistic prices. I have to admit, I've worked for companies, I'm sad to say, that they set pricing that they knew was unrealistic. They were trying to go low bid, knowing full well that there was no way to make a profit, and they were going to do things after the award to try to make up for that with change orders and the like. And that's just not a good way to go into it. Time frames for when something could be delivered. So over promising, and again with the focus of, well, let's win the contract and we'll worry about it in execution. So there are a lot of wishful thinking. All these will ultimately, in my experience, result in partial or even total failure of the entire process. And I've seen a long list, almost a hall of shame of many contracts that spent a lot of money but never delivered any value, ended up being canceled, ended up just being a complete failure. And it wasn't all because of the contracts. Certainly there were other factors, but many times you can look at what was expected and what was written in the contract, and you could almost predict that this was not going to end well. In fact, when I was the Agile practice director for a big federal IT company, I would advise the business unit executives responsible for our lines of business, when they were looking at going after business in the government, and the government customer was asking for an Agile contract. They wanted to do Agile on their program. But then when we looked at the contractual language, it was very clear they had no idea what they were asking for, because the contract language was filled with legacy waterfall win-lose language. And yet they would sprinkle some Agile terms and say, we want you to be Agile. That is going to be a disaster. There is no way that you win in that. It's just never going to turn out well. And I would actually advise them, don't bid that. Like that, you are guaranteed to lose money for the company if you have the misfortune of actually winning that bid. So we want to avoid those. One of the big problems when we want to work in an Agile way with a supplier and a buyer, and we got to have this contract between the two, is that there are some real conflicts in the legacy paradigms and what the lean Agile environment requires. And I'm not going to read everyone in detail, but you can just kind of see this compare and contrast, right? Traditionally, we defined detailed requirements up front. We expected the bidder to bid those requirements, to price those requirements, and then once they award the contract, then they had better deliver exactly what the contract says. And if anything required a deviation, then now we're in the land of change orders. So everything is strictly controlled. In a lean Agile world, of course, we know we can't answer all the questions up front. There are too many unknowns. Requirements change. Even the customer doesn't know exactly what they want. And so how on earth can we go into this saying that we're going to detail it out up front and nothing's ever going to change? It doesn't make sense. And Lean Agile knows that. So a Lean Agile contract right off the bat is going to be very different on that aspect. Same thing about point solution, right? We know exactly what we want before we ever get started. Now, sometimes that may be possible if I'm writing a contract for a manufacturer to build this pin. This is a known thing, and I probably know enough about design and materials and inks and how springs work that I could create a very detailed specification and give it to a manufacturer and do a quality check as product came off the line and make sure that they met our specification. Building software, building technology, building things we've never built before does not work like building this pin. And so assuming that I could know everything up front and contract for a point solution just doesn't work, right? We know that the scientific experiment method with a hypothesis and incremental and rapid experimentation is the best way to build technical solutions that we've never built before, which is very different than contracting for a point solution. So you get the picture as you walk down through these. that there are just some really dramatic paradigm differences between our traditional way of contracting and the kind of contract that would enable and support and encourage the way a lean, agile, safe environment needs to work if we're going to do it the way those models are designed to guide us. As if that wasn't bad enough, there are some other challenges. If you think about the traditional relationship between a buyer and a supplier, they have conflicting and often diametrically opposed goals. So think about what the buyer wants. The buyer wants to get the most benefit for the amount of money they're going to spend. They want to do that with minimal risk. They want to be very clear, if I'm going to pay X, I'm going to get Y. And I don't like a lot of unknowns there. I want to be able to justify the expenditure and the selection of this supplier and minimize the risk to our organization for the money we're about to spend. Buyers also want to obtain the supplier's best talent. If this is a labor contract, right, I don't want you to bid your superstars, and then if you win the contract, say, oh, I'm sorry, those folks are busy. We're going to give you a whole different set of people. And, you know, there are some consulting shops out there in the world that have a reputation for sending in boatloads of, you know, fresh college grads that, you know, are very green and don't have a lot of experience when they win these contracts. And obviously that doesn't go over well. And they also want to make sure that what gets built as a result of this cooperative effort is a differentiator, right? They want this to create competitive advantage in the marketplace. So they're very concerned about the things they work together with this supplier getting out to the competition. Now, if you look at the suppliers on the other hand, they have a very different set of priorities, right? They want to maximize profitability. If we win this contract, we're going to have a cost. We're also going to charge a certain amount for our products and services. And the difference between those two will determine our profit. We want to get as much profit as we possibly can, which means, right, we're at whatever it is we bid, we're going to have to control the cost in order to maintain that profitability. Suppliers also want to exploit variability versus minimize risk, right? They know in suppliers, because they're the innovators, they're the ones that are creating new products, they know that in variability is where you have the opportunity to create differentiated products. And so they don't want to be order takers and just, you know, build against a specification, right? While that may minimize risk on the buyer side, from the supplier side, it ties their hands. Right? There's no margin to innovate and differentiate. Suppliers also want to leverage talent across customers. This was a constant challenge in the government space because there was a limited talent pool. Most government agencies wanted their suppliers to hire people and have them work on site in government buildings under government supervision. So it was this very small talent pool. And what you've often found is the different integrators were having to leverage talent all over the place. And yeah, they may show up for this contract for a little bit, give the crew that's there some guidance, but then they got to go over to this other customer. That typically doesn't go well with the suppliers. And then unlike the supplier who wants their solution to be totally unique, suppliers know they're going to invest a lot in innovation. If they come up with a great idea, they want to be able to leverage that innovative development across many customers, because that's going to maximize their return on that innovation. So you just look at the two of these together, and right off the bat, it seems like it just the nature of buyer and supplier have set us up for this combative win-lose sort of relationship if we don't manage it well. But it's even better. It's even more complicated by the fact that inside of both of those organizations, you have different domains who also have their own agendas, right? If you think about the difference between what the executives want versus what the sales group wants versus what the PMO wants or what the legal team wants or what the contracting officer wants, they're also at odds with each other. So even inside of these two organizations, there's some fracturing and differences of opinion. I often sat in that program management space, and if I'm going to be the person on site, the face of the company, I want to deliver the best value. I want to deliver the best innovation. Well, contracting may want to make sure that that everything is tightly controlled and we're managing risk, which will tie my hands from really serving my customer the way I want to. So many of you may have lived this as well, that we're really at odds internally with each other. So all of this together creates kind of a mess, right? It creates kind of a really messy landscape against which we have to somehow figure out a way that all of these different stakeholders and these different interests can be served in a win-win fashion, both internally and between the two parties. So we got to have a different approach. So you guys are familiar with this picture. If you have any background from PMI, you know the whole iron triangle conversation, right? That we're going to, we have scope and we have time and we have cost, and we're going to put as many constraints on those as we possibly can through requirements, through the pricing bid, and through the schedule that we put in the contract. But of course, we know what the iron triangle drives, right? If you fix all three corners, inevitably you're going to fail because we don't have that much precision to be able to fix all three. Something's got to give. The option on the right, which actually comes from Jeff Sutherland, if I remember correctly, is a different way of thinking. Right? It's recognizing that yes, there are constraints in a contract. That there is not an unlimited amount of time to deliver a solution. The buyer does not have an unlimited amount of money to pay, where it's just a never-ending ATM. And they do want to understand scope. They're paying real money, often lots and lots of money, and they need to know that what they're getting is going to meet the need. And so the scope is so those things are very important. But what Sutherland posits is that that's only one corner of the triangle, the constraints, all three of those things in combination. Those constraints have to be weighed against the other two corners, which is finding the right balance with the constraints, given those constraints, to deliver the best value and the best quality. And the real balancing act is not between the 3 points on the left, but it's the 3 points on the right. So it's a different mental model that we need to take into the whole exercise of putting a bid out, putting a contract out, awarding a contract, working out the terms and conditions between the two parties. So we need a different set of goals. If we're going to have a different approach to contracting, what are we trying to get out of it? And so here are the goals that we have for an agile contract, and this will feed into our model for a managed investment contract. So you'll notice that this is very different than what we've talked about up to this point. In an agile contract, we want to maximize and optimize the economic value for all parties, short-term and long-term. So this isn't win-lose. This isn't, I'm going to turn the screws on the supplier, and bleed them out for every little bit. No, that's not an agile contract. That's a traditional contract. Here, the buyer wants to make sure that they get great benefit from this relationship, but they also realize that suppliers are only in business. We only have suppliers to choose from if those suppliers are also economically successful. If we make the contract such that our suppliers are constantly losing money, eventually the suppliers are all going to go out of business, and then then the whole system is broken, because the buyer's never going to have all the people, all the skill sets, all the capabilities to completely build things by themselves without suppliers. So if they drive all the suppliers out of business, that's bad. So we need to have a different mental model, right? We both need to win here. Another mental model that has to change for agile contracts is contracts have to recognize up front that as a buyer, even we don't know everything. And I have seen this play out so many times. Now, it's not because the buyers are being bad, they're just being human. Because there are certain things that buyers contract for that they can't articulate every single requirement up front, even if they try. I've been in situations where, and you probably have too, where on a program, we had a part of the solution, we built a part of that solution exactly the way they asked for it, to the letter. And then we demoed that thing, and then the customer would look at that and say, yeah, that's what we asked for, but now that I see it, I now realize that's not going to work. Now, were they being, were they doing that intentionally? No, of course not. Because when we're building new things that have never been built before, we'll do the very best we can to express what it is that we're wanting. And the supplier will do the very best they can to build what you ask for. But until you have the tangible evidence of the thing built, one of the key elements of the Agile Manifesto, that's why we measure progress on working software and systems. Because when we have those pieces that are actually working, we see them working, then we know if that's actually going to meet the need. And sometimes it's not. And so if the contract does not recognize that in advance and doesn't have a mechanism in place to respond in such a way that doesn't throw us into a combative situation, doesn't throw us into never-ending change orders, it's designed to say, we know this is going to happen, and here is a well thought through way to deal with the fact that we are going to uncover new requirements. So how are we going to do that in a way that doesn't cause immediate slowdown, waste in the system? Next thing we need out of an agile contract: visibility and objective evidence. We've all been in those contractual situations as suppliers where our performance was being evaluated based on status reports and EVM statistics and all kinds of, not on the thing that was getting built, but on all these programmatics. And of course, in Lean-Agile and SAFe, we say that's not the way we want to work. The contract should recognize that we are going to measure the performance of the supplier based on the objective evidence of what they're producing in an iterative and incremental fashion. And so the performance measurement section of the contract has got to change. Number 4, providing a measured approach to investment that can vary over time and stop when sufficient value has been achieved. If you think about what we talk in SAFe in the portfolio level, when you look at lean budgets and around performance management and at the LPM level, one of the things that we talk about with epics is that you define an epic. Epic has 1 to n number of features that it takes to deliver. And we want to build those in priority order so that if we get to a certain point through the priority list of features, and we determine that, we started with 100 features for this epic, and we've built the top 70. And now that we've got the top 70 and they're working and they're in production, we're kind of looking at the value that we've got, and we're looking at the cost of the remaining 30 features. And you know what? Now that we see what we've got and we look at the other 30 features, that's not where we want to spend that money. We've got a better place to direct that money to something that's more valuable over the last 30 features that we thought we were going to do. Contracts are typically not designed to handle that. So we need to have language that says that investment can be adjusted and we can stop when sufficient value has been achieved. Now that sounds great for the buyer. The challenge is for the supplier is that reduction of scope may kill their entire profitability for the engagement. And again, we know if we kill the profitability for our suppliers, eventually we're not going to have any suppliers. So another element to an agile contract is, yes, we want to give that buyer the ability to stop when they've received sufficient value, but the contract should also understand that the supplier needs a certain amount of confidence in funding and sufficient notice so that they can both bid it properly, and if we wind it up in that fashion, they still made a profit. They still have a financial benefit, and they know that going in, and they can build their bid in such a way that it assures that. Again, very, very different from what I've seen in most contractual situations. And then finally, the biggest thing is we want to build it in such a way that both parties are motivated. There are terms and conditions in the contract that equally motivate both the buyer and the supplier to strive to building the best solution possible within those constraints of time, cost, and scope that we know have to be there for all the reasons we stated previously. If we do the things on this slide, then we have a snowball's chance of actually achieving what the Agile Manifesto has said all along since 2001, which is this idea of customer collaboration. Well, who's collaborating? It's the, at least one very clear definition there is the customer, the buyer, and their suppliers. And focusing on that collaboration over just managing every T and C in the contract. And I know that's not easy. It's easy to say, very difficult to do in most environments against the legislative and regulatory environment, against the legal precedents, against the past practice. So trust me, I know these things are not just easy wave the wand kind of things, but I can also tell you that they are absolutely possible. I have seen these contracts, and they are definitely in existence, and they can be done. It just takes some time, and it takes some will. So I'm gonna throw these up very quickly. You can read these. So we want to exploit variability, objective evidence of solution fitness, vary over time, and stop when values has been achieved. Give that system builder near confidence of funding and time to wind down. This is a bit duplicative. I apologize for that. I probably pulled in 2 slides from 2 different places and had a little redundancy there. So apologies there. All right, there's the preliminaries. Let's get into the thing that you guys came to hear about, which specifically is SAFe's conversation on how do you achieve all the things that I just described, specifically in a SAFe context in one particular aspect. So just as a basic introduction, we know from SAFe, if you go right to the framework and into where it's actually expressed in the large solution level, in the solution train, where you see the iconic representation of the supplier as part of a solution train. Now, we put that on the big picture in that place for convenience, but of course we know that suppliers and contracts could be a very present and high level concern, even if we just have one art. It doesn't have to be a solution train. That's just where we happen to represent it on the big picture. And why is it almost always present? Because, as we said earlier, organizations often need external expertise and horsepower to build and maintain their differentiated solutions in the marketplace that they use to drive their operations to make a profit. So suppliers, because of that, suppliers can absolutely be engaged in any of the SAFe configurations that we have in SAFe. Now, suppliers, let's understand that suppliers can be on any extreme. They could be completely black box, what we mean by that is, as a buyer, we really don't know how they make their sausage. They provide us a canned solution and we pay for that thing. Or that supplier can provide us with people resources, with people power, with labor, with practitioners, experts who are going to join with our own staff and together work to build the solution. Now, in either case, we absolutely want the relationship between the buyer and the supplier to have this positive, different mindset toward the contract between the two parties. We want them to have that language. What I'm going to describe in terms of the managed investment contract really is targeted toward the latter of those two situations, where we're building a big solution. We're going to have our own FTEs on the effort, but we're going to need other FTEs to come in as contract labor, to either just because of the amount of manpower that we need, or because we need specific skill sets that we don't have organically in the organization, and so we need to bring that skill set in. The management investment contract things, what you will see next, are probably less applicable for a situation where you're not contracting for the assistance of people. If you're buying, for example, on your initiative, you're just going to do a contract for X amount of capacity on AWS, or you're going to buy some company's widget and you're going to integrate their already existing widget that they sell to many other customers, and you're going to integrate that widget into your solution, then some of these things we're going to talk about are probably less applicable. But the nature of the relationship that is an agile contract type of relationship that we had in the previous slides are all still very much valid, and that's what our lawyers and our contracting officers, those are the types of contracting language that they should be writing. So let's talk about the SAFe managed investment contracts. When we are bringing in people into the organization from an external supplier to join our own staff in building the solution, the SAFe managed investment contract suggests that we think about the terms of the contract with some of these elements. First, we're gonna ask for fixed capacity per iteration or for program increment. So rather than just saying, I want to contract for developer 3 and this is their labor rate. Now, if you just want pure time and materials and you just want to contract for that expertise at that rate, you certainly can. Most companies that I work with these days are not really excited about time and materials contracts and are trying to move more away from that. So that moves us to some of the other contract types. And so what we need to think about, what is it that we're contracting for, is this idea of I'm adding capacity to my agile release train or to my solution train in order to deliver on this solution. So that's the first thing. Second thing, a management investment contract operates under a very clear vision, roadmap, backlog, and architectural and UX guidance. So in other words, when the buyer puts out the request for a proposal, these are the kinds of things that should be very clear up front. Don't just say, I need so many developers, give me a rate. If we're bringing them in and integrating them into our environment, helping the suppliers understand exactly what we're trying to achieve, what the roadmap is for how we're going to deliver this solution, some of the features or epics that are in our backlog, depending on the size of the solution we're talking about, and some of the technical environment, what they should expect. That helps them understand the kind of people and skill sets that they need to propose to be successful and to deliver value. Make it clear in the contract that we're going to evaluate iteratively and as we're building. So there should be an expectation that we're gonna contract for fixed capacity to come in and join this train, join the solution train. But there's going to be a regular cadence-based evaluation of how you are performing. And it's based on objective evidence of what's being delivered. And we're going to give you that iterative and incremental feedback so that we can demonstrate another very important core value of SAFe, which is this idea of relentless improvement. This, in a SAFe managed investment contract, the customer, the buyer, absolutely has control over the investment, and they can stop, continue, increase, or decrease the funding and the priorities based on the results that they are seeing. And this is very different. And when I talk to CFOs and contracting officers, it's something that I try to help them understand. Is oftentimes there's a misperception that if we go to an agile contract, we're going to lose all the controls that we thought we had, or at least we felt we had, when we did all these detailed specifications up front, right? Now, what they really had was a sense of false assurance that those things were giving them, because we all know how often, you know, those detailed requirements actually lead us to success in the end. So what it is, it's a matter of retraining those fiduciaries on how exactly they're able to control and manage the investment and still have that carry out their responsibility. They're just doing it in a different way. And then finally, the customer absolutely can exit when sufficient return on investment is achieved with reasonable notice to the supplier. I'm going to talk about how you do that. So first thing, number one, and I'm going to walk you through a series of steps here. If you've seen the video I've recorded, this will look familiar, but this is the process of the managed investment contract. Number one, we change the purchase quantum. So when we're bringing people into the environment, rather than just, as we often would do in the government space, just put a whole list of job descriptions and have them bid hourly rates for for these different roles, we're asking the supplier to bid and provide agile teams, whole agile teams that understand how to work in an agile way, that have a certain set of technical skills, that can come into the environment and work as an agile team. And they're going to follow all the normal attributes of what we know about agile teams, which they're going to be that 7 ± 2 people, everything that we talk about in the agile team article in SAFe. Understand that the product owner and or the scrum master may or may not be provided by the buyer. And I've been in enough environments to know that there's no one answer to this. I've been in environments where both of those roles were provided by the supplier. I've been in situations where the buyer provided the product owner, but the supplier provided the scrum master. And I've been in environments where the technical part of the team was provided by the supplier, but the buyer provided both product owner and scrum master. So any of those combinations, there's reasons why and arguments for all of those different configurations, and it depends on exactly what the context is. But we definitely want the team to be cross-functional, self-organizing, and they're going to define, build, and test value just like any agile team would. And then what the supplier does is they bid a fixed price per team per PI. And that per PI becomes an important factor here, and you'll see in an upcoming slide. And the expectation is that, and this is again where you have to have agreement between, this doesn't work if both the buyer and the supplier are on the same sheet of paper, because the buyer is going to determine the backlog priority in most cases. They know that they have to have a commitment on their side to provide the review and the feedback, the participation in PI planning, all those things, and they have to commit to that, or there's no way that the supplier can deliver the value in every iteration, in every PI. So they kind of both have to be bought into and working in the SAFe context. If there's a mismatch there, then this is not going to work. So this whole changing the buying quantum is not new to SAFe. I've seen this work in the government space in different contexts. Mark Schwartz, you may be familiar with that name from the DevOps community. He was a CIO at DHS. He used to call this, we're going to contract for the factory, not for the car. We're adding capacity to our value stream that is producing the solution. That's what we're asking for. All right, let me finish this off quickly, and then we'll see if there are any questions. I haven't seen any in the chat yet, but maybe there are some. So the next step is in the pre-contract. So this is before we ever have the contract out, as we're putting the bid out on the street. You want to define clear expectations for the first PI specifically, maybe for the first couple of PIs, because those are the most known, and that's going to provide a backdrop for the suppliers to bid to. A clear set of ramp up and ramp down commitments, right? So how are you going to onboard the supplier so that they can be productive as soon as possible? And then once the relationship is concluded, how are we going to ramp down? Having a set up front in the RFP, what are the responsibilities and commitments on both sides? And we'll see that on the next page. How many teams are we contracting for? What's the composition of those teams? What skill sets do we need within those teams? The RFP would have that vision roadmap as we said previously, and then the buyer also commits, unless there's some break glass in case of emergency situation, we're going to commit to the supplier that once we bring that Agile team or teams on board, we will give them a full PI to demonstrate their capabilities. In some cases, I've seen it be 2 PIs, right? So that's generally speaking 6 months of known commitment that we're going to have our teams at this customer site for at least 6 months, and we know we're going to have that period to demonstrate that we brought the right skill of people, that they know how to work in this environment, that they're delivering value as set forth in the expectations of the contract. And then also the forecasting criteria for, if the first PI goes well, we're typically not just going to stop there. So in addition to committing to the first PI, what's the process for determining how many additional PIs so that the supplier can plan? They have to plan for those resources. So we need to have a paradigm for that in the contract. I mentioned these shared responsibilities. This is what you often will not find in just about any traditional contract. Yes, you will find a section often that talks about the buyer responsibilities and the supplier responsibilities. Only in Agile contracts do you typically find a section that talks about these are the shared responsibilities. Both parties are equally responsible for doing a certain set of things, which means if it goes well, we share in the rewards. If it goes bad, we share in the pain. All right. And so defining those clear expectations, there's a set on the slide that are a good set, but it's certainly not intended to say these are the only things that you would have as shared responsibilities, but it's one of the key differentiators between an Agile contract and your traditional contract. So we put the bid out, we have those clear expectations, we express them in Agile terms and in SAFe language. We get bids in, we select a supplier, we onboard them. Now the next part of this is actually in the execution. right? So we have to have a clear picture for how we are going to work together during the execution of a PI. We got them on board. They bid for a PI. We brought X number of teams in. We have to now perform the first PI planning, which means we need to think about how are we going to allow these contractors to be a part of our PI planning process? What things are going to be briefed? Do we have NDAs in place? Are we comfortable with them being in the room? We need to think about these. I have been in PI plannings where, you know, that critical upfront information that comes from business owners, I had to send all the contractors out of the room because we're going to talk about super secret squirrel stuff and they can't hear that because they're contractors. Well, that's a little tough because that context is what's so critical and they're the ones that are going to be actually building the solution. So how are they going to get that context? We may need to think about those briefings a little bit differently because it's important for them to be there. We're going to execute the first PI. We're going to do all the things that SAFe talks about. And we want to integrate those supplier teams right in with all the other teams and work in an integrated and cooperative fashion. We'll update the program scope and guideline, update the vision and backlog, do all of those normal things. What the customer has all along the way is the ability to evaluate how the supplier is performing over the course of the PI. What kinds of solutions are they delivering? Can we evaluate the objective evidence of what they're providing? We want to provide feedback as we go. We don't want to just say, all right, we're back here taking notes and we're observing everything you're doing. But we're going to wait until the very end of the PI, and then we're going to tell you about all of the stuff that you did that we didn't like. Well, that's not a relentless improvement agile way of thinking, right? We're going to evaluate, but we're going to provide ongoing feedback so they can correct and adjust and perform. We want to expect them to participate and inspect and adapt. There are important things that they need to be a part of there as well. So we need to think about that. We'll continue in this iterative process and integrate them as if they were part of our own teams. Now, once we get through the first commitment period, then we're going to start having to think, all right, if we're happy with this supplier, if they're performing well, if the teams are doing well, that process that we talked about that needed to be outlined in the contract, as we get through the PI, we're going to have to start thinking about how do we continue to extend and fund additional PIs for as long as we need that amount of capacity on the train. So we would need to think about, are we extending one PI at a time? Are we extending 2 PIs at a time? How exactly are we do that? What contracting mechanisms did we put in place to make this very easy? So for example, in the government space, we have certain types of vehicles like IDIQs and BPAs. Basically, they're umbrella contracts that are awarded, and then within that umbrella contract, you're able to issue task orders, miniature contracts under the umbrella that have smaller, kind of chunk out the actual delivery of certain parts of the relationship over time. It's a great way. And there are commercial equivalents of the same concepts. It's a great way to have a contract type that matches the way you want to do this kind of rolling wave planning and funding as you see the solutions start to emerge, right? And again, you're doing all the normal process throughout that PI, and also keeping in mind one of the responsibilities that the buyer has is to be looking ahead and saying, when do we see the point in time that we may no longer need this buyer? Remember, part of the concept of an agile contract is we want to give them a heads up when we see that coming, when we think we're going to stop because we have enough value here, so that they've got a certain period of time of assured funding and they can plan those resources. And again, we will make sure that they remain profitable. Eventually, we will end the relationship. We will end the contract. We will move on. and execute those parts of the contract that, if you remember, we said we wanted to define those up front. And so that, knowledge transfers, all those things take place. So we had a very good, very positive win-win relationship between buyer and supplier over the life of the contract. So a quick summary. We definitely have to shift focus into delivering the most value and with highest quality within that corner constraint of time, cost, and scope. We want to focus on maximizing economic benefit for all parties. We have to create this collaborative relationship so we're both pulling together to get the best possible solution. The contract language should absolutely reflect Lean Agile values, principles, and practices. If you see somebody with what they say is an Agile contract, and you're seeing, all that stage gating and status reporting and big design up front, that they may think they want an Agile contract, but they really don't know how to write one, and those are pretty dangerous from both a buyer and a supplier's perspective. So what we've talked about tonight, the SAFe Managed Investment Contract, it's one example. We certainly do not claim that it is the only way to do things. Not every environment is going to be such that you can contract for entire Agile teams for PIs. But it's definitely one way that does work. I've seen it work in multiple government contracts, and it's something that that you would definitely want to keep in mind. Whether you're on this call tonight as a buyer or a supplier, it's got some good benefits. The link to the article in the framework that provides more detail behind Agile contracts is at the URL you see at the bottom of the screen. The last thing I want to share with you before I take questions is that in addition to what SAFe prescribes, there are several resources out there. There may be more now. I haven't checked this list lately, but I have every one of these books. I read each of them in the work that I did to prepare to build this portion of the government class around contracting, and they each have some good parts and some good thoughts. Some have some good templates. The Lean Agile procurement one has some really good templates in them that you could just pick up and follow. I think they also have a website, at least they used to, where some of those templates could be found. So if you want to dig further, here are some examples of other external resources around the topic of Agile contracts that you might find helpful. And with that, that's the end of what I have to present. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Dr. Steve. That was really interesting. It's covered not only like investment contract in SAFe, it covered contracts overall. It was really exciting and very informative. I have a couple of questions, but I'll open the floor for others before I share mine. If you have any question, please unmute yourself and please go ahead and ask your question.
Mark, maybe you can prime the pump with your questions.
Sure.
This is Michael. I have one question.
Sure, Michael, go ahead.
So in the SAFe, in most of the SAFe online that I've read, they talk about treating a supplier like a train. So how does that fit into? So do we make them a whole train? I know you said that we can treat them like a black box.
Yes.
So it looks like, so how do we, with black box, or treating them like a train? So what is the best approach?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's a great question. So when in the framework, when we talk about that, that's usually a situation where it is more of a more along the lines of a black box situation and not the managed investment contract situation. So there's a situation where the supplier, so let's say you have a supplier that I'll just use an example. If I were working on a a big defense contract like for a jet fighter, I may have a supplier that is developing a subsystem, but they're pretty much contracted to develop that subsystem against our requirements and deliver that subsystem, and at some point work with other teams to integrate that into our total solution. Oftentimes in that environment, a government contracting for that jet fighter, it kind of takes the position of I don't really care what your internal processes are. You could be agile. If you're waterfall, that's your choice. You're your own company. We can't dictate to you how you work. But what's different about that kind of situation in SAFe with other trains that are following this cadence-based development process is how do I integrate those two paradigms, right? How do I make sure that subsystem is being developed in the same mindset and awareness, and when we get to integration and testing, it's against this iterative cadence-based process, not against some long elaborate project plan, because we don't have those, right? So what we mean when we say treat them like a train is this, by the way, assumes that the buyer is the one that has adopted SAFe. They've got multiple trains on this solution train, and now they've got this supplier, and they have to figure out how to integrate the work of the supplier into all the other things that are happening in building the solution. So when we say treat them like a train, practically what that means is when we sit down with that supplier, we explain to them the process model that we're using to build this overall solution. We're using SAFe. It's an iterative, cadence-based process. We explain to them that we do, this is our cadence. We do these planning events called PI planning. We have demos. We have program boards that show dependencies. We have all these different things. Now, as an external supplier, you're not coming in and joining the train directly, but you are supplying a piece that's important to the solution this train or solution train is building. So you need to understand that if you're going to be a supplier in this effort, you need to do things like have a representation that attends PI planning. Not your entire workforce that's building your subcomponent, but maybe your program manager or your architect, or some combination of people that are going to come and participate so that you understand updates to vision, updates to architecture, that you see what other teams have developed as they demo what they got done. You will understand what other trains and teams may be dependent on something that your company is doing, and vice versa. So by attending PI planning, you have the opportunity to express where you need other parts of trains to do something that you're going to need to have to be successful, and they're going to be able to express to you, can you commit to having this thing done by this iteration in the PI, because that's a dependency. We'll reflect that on the dependency board. Often we'll add their own swim lane. If this is a large solution, we have a solution train. We have a solution board where the rows are trains, not teams. And so we may give them their entire row just so that there's a place that we can visualize those dependencies. We'll want them to participate in demos. We'll want them to participate in the I&A, just so that there's communication and transparency both ways. Now, with the information that they gather, they can go back to their company and they can build their widget however they choose. If they want to follow up, a traditional project plan, that's up to them. Their project plan just better have been constructed to reflect at least some intent to deliver the thing that we're depending on them to deliver, that they said they would deliver during planning, and that we reflected on the board. So you see what I'm saying? That from that perspective, we're kind of treating them as if they were a train in our solution train, but in reality, what's happening is they're sending representation so that in alignment with the SAFe ceremonies and events, they can interact, but then they go back, and how their workforce actually builds their thing is completely up to them. And we can't dictate that process. Does that help provide clarity?
Yes, thank you very much, sir.
Yeah. And by the way, and that's very, very different than that's why I said up front. That's one paradigm. And so what you want to do is make sure that you put those expectations very clearly in the solicitation. So you lay it out. This is how we work. This is the cadence we follow. These are the events that are critical for you to provide representation to. Here's what's going to happen in them. Be prepared to interact and to commit. How you execute on that when you go back to your company is your business. But you have to be prepared to integrate with us in this fashion. If you can't work with that, then don't bid on the business, because this is how you will be evaluated. And as long as it's upfront, it's fine. Management investment contract, the buying of teams or buying of capacity in the form of teams, that's a different model.
Thank you.
Steve, thank you for your presentation. Mark, if you allow me, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Fadi. I am from Egypt. It's after midnight right now. I think it's 1 a.m. in the morning.
Oh my goodness, you are dedicated.
No, thank you. Actually, it was a great one. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. And I have a couple of questions for you, Steve. First, in the normal contracts, when we are having like penalties, if you are not going to finish your work, or maybe it's not up to expectations, we may have some kind of penalties. This is a normal contract. So I was thinking how it should apply if we are going to having this in the BI. So you're going to deliver the value of the BI, but sometimes you may not deliver the full value for the BI. You may be succeeding deliver some of BI objective, but some are not met. Mm-hmm. So how we are going to do this payment process when it comes to payment? And my second question is, sometimes we find that some of suppliers, especially if you're speaking about outsourcing for teams, they're facing problems. So they say, okay, we are not going to continue. So how we measure and how can we overcome this kind of risks when we are going to have a BI? Because I understand you mentioned about iteration, and we can having an iteration, but you just mentioned it. We make it work for the companies by make it for 6 months, 2 BIs. But if I am a buyer, I may have a problem, because for nowadays in coronavirus, we found some companies are stop working and they just lay off employees because the market is slowing down.
Right.
So how can we accommodate these things in SAFe? Sorry for being long in questions.
No, that's fine. No, those are absolutely great questions. So let me deal with the first one first. So I get this isn't that buyers are being bad. Buyers are trying to mitigate their risk. What if we have a supplier that's not performing. And the traditional thought process of how to do that is we're going to build penalties into the contract. So it basically it creates fear in the supplier of not performing, so they will perform. That doesn't work, in my experience, that doesn't work any better for suppliers than it does for individuals and employees. Fear is not the motivator, not anymore. Maybe it was 100 years ago. In 2020, that doesn't get you good results. I don't care how ironclad the language is. And frankly, it's not needed. Because if you take the approach in the managed investment contract that we talked about, that supplier knows that the mechanism is in place that they have to deliver. They have to prove their ability to perform, because otherwise on that cadence boundary, the buyer has the absolute ability to not extend. And then their revenue stream is done. They're out. And so that in itself is the main motivator. Now, to your second question, which also applies to the first question, there's another contractual mechanism that I have seen used in combination with everything else I've described. So we not only do the umbrella contract with the task order, the umbrella contract itself is a multi-award contract. In other words, we're gonna do an umbrella contract that sets the overall terms and conditions and what we're trying to accomplish and so forth. We're gonna put it out for bid, and we're going to bring more than one supplier into the umbrella as an awardee. Now they haven't got an actual task order to do any work yet. They have just agreed to be part of this set of companies that we could potentially issue a task order to in order to have them provide us with teams or whatever the case may be. I see this being used very frequently in the government space here in the United States. And what that does from a buyer executive perspective is that creates the environment where the supplier is motivated to perform and to deliver quality working component systems, to have people that are seen as high performing, well skilled, ability to deliver. Because as a supplier, they know there are other suppliers already under contract in the umbrella, and that if they fail to perform, they can simply be told, your team is no longer on the contract, you need to exit, and we will task order another one of the companies to provide us with a replacement team. Now, it's obviously more involved in that, but that's fundamentally how it works. And I have seen that actually happen. I have seen, a government agency think that this was the best company to issue task orders to bring teams on. They came on, they started, and lo and behold, that company was unable to staff the kind of quality talent on the teams that they said they could in their bid. Fortunately, they'd already gone through that whole solicitation process and had other companies that may have other teams that they were providing that they could turn to quickly and say, hey, we're going to have to pull this team off the effort, and we want to award you a task order to plus up a team. How fast can you have them on board? Now, that supplier should be expecting that, because that was the rules of the game that was set up by the solicitation. So the suppliers that can respond to that need quickly are given that opportunity to prove that they can meet the need if somebody else can't. So it creates this drive. It's not a fear of penalty, right? It's not a stick motivation. It's a carrot motivation, right? You perform, you get more business, right? You don't perform, we have a mechanism in place to give that business to someone else and do so very quickly without having to start the whole solicitation process all over again. It is becoming, between that and the smaller micro contracts that have become very popular in the defense space here in the US, those two paradigms are the most common paradigms that I'm seeing very commonly used, and addresses those two very situations that you described. It just does it in a different and more modern and more agile fashion, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Do you have, I want to ask about the payment process. Sorry, again, I got another question, but actually when you just mentioned this, one question popped to my mind, which is the payments and how payment mechanism is going in place. So it's the same like the old one in the normal contracts, or upon your experience, it has some differentiating than what we have right now, if you are going to invest in agile contracts.
Are you saying payments?
Yeah, payments mechanism.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Are you talking about things like fixed price or time and materials, or?
No. I'm saying, okay, in normal contracts, usually we have like some kind of down payments, and then when you do the first phase of the work, or maybe something like this, you have like 25%, 30%, and then we move.
So payment term, you mean, Fadi?
Yes.
Payment terms?
Yes. Payment terms, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of the elements that we just don't see in agile contracts, because maybe in the black box approach you may still see that. So again, going back to the jet fighter, if General Dynamics or Lockheed Martin has this very major complex subsystem like an engine, right? They're going to provide the engine. Mm-hmm. There may be stages of that engine development for that jet fighter that have payment terms tied to them, right? You get through this part of the design, or you deliver this subsystem, and there will be a payment issued associated with the successful delivery of that subsystem. So you still see that in more of those black box situations. In the managed investment contract, where we're buying capacity, you don't see that. Not in agile contracting. What you see is, in fact, it's, of all the contract types, firm fixed price is actually the most common, because if you think about it, if they're real agile teams and they're working in a real safe environment, the time and the cost are known, because we have stable teams that are fully dedicated, and we know how many of them we have. We know what the cost of the team is, and we know how long that team is going to be working within that PI. It's the easiest thing in the world to use in a fixed price model. So you're going to get paid X amount for your agile team per PI that they stay on the contract. And as long as they're performing and doing what we ask them to do, then they're going to have additional PIs, and we know again what those costs are. And so the payment is tied to the fixed price that's bid for the team for that time box of the PI, and for however many PIs that they remain on. if they don't perform for whatever reason, then the mechanism that the buyer has is they don't get another PI. They're rolled off. And those terms are set forth very clearly up front. How they are going to be evaluated is defined clearly up front. And things like how that supplier is going to work cooperatively with other suppliers can absolutely and should be a term in the contract by which their performance will be evaluated. And what that does is it makes it very clear, you know, if you see other suppliers in this program as competition, and you don't want to cooperate with them because they may learn some secret from you, and frankly you want to make them look bad, so maybe they get kicked off. You can actually write language in the contract that says that if we, the buyer, detect that kind of behavior, you will be kicked off the program. Right? I'm telling you, I've seen the contracts. This language exists in real, no kidding, contracts that are live and going today. You can contract for anything, including how well your people integrate with the other players in the program, be it another supplier or be it with the buyer.
Thank you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You bet.
So, Dr. Steve, thanks a lot. I have a question. You mentioned something very interesting around the term of 2 PI, which is equal to 6 months. This is aligned with participatory budget review that we will have twice a year. Is there any connection between those?
Not directly, not directly. It's just a recognition of the realities on the ground of, these kind of conversations are pretty typical in very large organizations. So either government agencies or huge commercial enterprises where, the wheels just only move so fast. And so these 6 month blocks, which is just an example pattern, by the way, we don't dictate that at all. Different industries have different cadence patterns. The automotive industry, for example, has a much shorter cadence pattern than a lot of other industries. Their PIs are typically 6 weeks long. So 2 PIs for them is only 12 weeks. So you do have to contextualize to your environment. We only use these as examples. But no, there's no direct connection between that 2 PI model and the strategic portfolio review, which is what you're referring to. I would say, however, that if the organization has implemented LPM and they have those events in place, and you've got a strategic portfolio review cadence established, whatever that cadence is would be quite logical to have that match that cadence for your contract, because it gives you the already established mechanism for the probably the very same resources who would have the authority to keep or to remove entire suppliers from an initiative. They're probably the same people that would be in that strategic portfolio review anyway. And so having a predictable rhythm for when you're going to execute those kinds of processes versus the old legacy way of working, which is we had 15 different kinds of reviews at all kinds of asynchronous, unpredictable schedules. And that's mania. That's just, death by meetings. This way you have a very known predictable cadence. You know when that's coming. You align your contract period such that reevaluation is going to happen as a natural part of that portfolio review. And so now there's a there's a common rhythm, right? That makes complete sense, and you're not having to call a bunch of extra meetings to make that happen. Does that help?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Any more questions before we close?
Sounds like people are ready to call it a night, especially
Our friend Father.
He is the real warrior out there, being in this conversation in the middle of the night.
No, thank you. My pleasure.
That's dedication.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, everyone. Thanks a bunch. Hope this helped. I know it's not an easy topic. You know, everything that I've described it's definitely possible. I've seen it. I've been a part of it, but I do not underestimate at all the level of effort that this represents. Especially if you're in the very beginning stages of having this conversation with executives and contracting officers and lawyers and things like that. The results that I described of organizations that are doing this today, they got there over many, many months, sometimes many years of maturing to the point where they could make that transition. It's not fast. I wish it were. It takes some dedication and some persistence to know that this is possible. It gets better results. It aligns to the agile culture that you're trying to go with in your organization. So you have to build relationships with the stakeholders that own those processes and just keep investing in that conversation, that relationship. Focus on the language of experimentation, right? Find opportunities to experiment with some of these ideas in ways that maybe those individuals would see that as less risky, and then set some clear expectations and ways to measure, you know, whether that experiment was successful or not, and then hopefully it produces good results and you can expand the adoption and eventually get there.
Okay, with that note, thanks everyone. Thank Dr. Steve. Thanks for everyone who jumped in today. I will share the details of the presentation later on. Thank you everyone. Looking forward to see you in our next session. And thank you again, Dr. Steve.
Thanks so much. And I will send you, Mark, I'll send you the presentation after the.
Great. Thank you.